in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet television channels. Please help me welcome J. Loren Norris.
That again, I was speaking faster than I was thinking. And I realized in that moment they actually need more coaching than they know. The challenge for a lot of people is they've always got something to say. Or maybe they just feel like they gotta say something. That's what I want to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Stay tuned.
Subscribe now for an extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J. Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And on many occasions, I've run into people who feel like because there's a word on the tip of my tongue, it ought to come out. But they forget about that. I believe it was Seinfeld, and it came up in an episode of Seinfeld, but it was part of his stand-up routine. He talked about sometimes you say those words, and it's like the speech bubble is still in the air. It hasn't even popped yet for everybody else to receive it, and suddenly you wish you could. There's a new tool if you use an iPhone. I don't know if Android has this or not, or maybe they've had it for years, but on the iPhone, if you've sent a text and you think about what you sent before they read it, you actually have the opportunity to unsend it. You can literally just click on it and delete or unsend the message. And it's best if they've never read it, because then you're free of whatever silly consequences you might have put yourself in jeopardy of by sending that text in the first place. But what a genius thing to be able to say, well, I didn't, or I mean, I know I said it, but that's not what I meant. I quoted it as Winston Churchill for a long time, but yesterday I read in a book that it was a different person, Woodrow Wilson perhaps, that said, if I have to speak for 20 minutes, give me a week to prepare, or a few weeks to prepare. If I got 10 minutes, and give me a little longer, and if an amount of time, then I'm ready to go right now. And as Maxwell points out, that's kind of a double-edged sword. It's a trap. There are a lot of people who feel like they just have to say. You've seen them in board meetings. You've seen them in network meetings. You've seen them gathered around a lunch or a birthday party or the water cooler at work, the coffee shop. They'll talk to anybody about anything forever. And sometimes they'll do that, not really say anything. I mean, yeah, there are words coming out of their mouth. There's articulation happening. There's some kind of thought process that goes into it. But you begin to see the people that are receiving that articulation. I say it that way because some of those people are not even in a conversation. Has that ever happened to you? You're standing in line and someone walks up and begins talking to you. It takes a minute or two, maybe at least a 20-second long, awkward pause before you realize they're talking to me. I don't know why they're talking to me. What they're saying to me means nothing to me. It makes no sense to me. Can I just walk away? But they're still talking. And act like what they're saying is absolutely critically important. And they haven't noticed you're not paying attention, or you're trying not to pay attention. La 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 la. Or maybe it's like that when the Bluetooth earbuds first came out and the lady and she was, yeah, uh-huh. Oh yeah, yeah. And the guy next to her is still talking, thinking she's repeating him. And then finally she says something and he's like, whoa. And then she turns and points to her ear. So much communication happens just like that, even when both sides of the conversation, both parties in the conversation are intentionally participating together. And the reason that happens is because there are some people who believe that communication is the over-articulation of ideas that have wandered through their heads like so many stray mustangs on a mountainside. I mean, if the thought came to my mind, then surely I should share it with the world. It's fodder at this moment. It's just a whole bunch of something moving through. I heard a counselor recently say when she was living in the trauma of her life, she felt like everything was static. I want you to think for a moment what it would feel like if every relationship, every conversation, every thought that went through your head was static. You know, the snow on the screen, the sound, it's incoherent. That doesn't mean it's not there. That doesn't mean it's not taking up time, space, energy, emotion. It just means it's undecipherable as anything usable or practical in your life. And there are people who live in emotional static, and those who live in conversational static, and those who live in a constant state of chaos in their mind. People with ADD sometimes have this hyper-focused problem. They're hyper-focused on one thing, and then instantly they're hyper-focused on now two things or four things or five things. I heard a young man who had been diagnosed early on with ADHD, and they had put him on various cornucopia of different medications to get him through high school. And his own description to me one day was, he said, if I take XYZ pill, I won't name it, give it credit, but he said, if I take that pill, I could stare at that pepper shaker for 30 minutes. As if I were counting the flakes inside the pepper shaker. A bomb could go off at the next table, and I could still stare at the pepper shaker. If I'm taking that medication, I'm that focused. And I contrast that moment with the friends that I've been a first responder with, the people that I worked right next to at a fire scene or at a crash site, at an accident, a house fire. And the constant phrase for all of them, just like it is door kickers and other operators, is keep your head on a swivel. There's always something going on that is not right in front of you. And it's life-threatening, and it can come into the frame of your life and your existence in an instant. And so you've got to be aware of all those things. And the balance between constantly looking like a bird in every direction, trying to find out what's coming next, and so focused on the thing in front of you that you wouldn't know if a tank pulled up next to you and began to fire. The balance between those two in communication is the difference between being so focused on what you have to say that you're unable to read the room around you. If you can't back up for a moment and ascertain through observation whether they're getting it, whether it matters, is it relevant to them? Are you talking over their heads in the choice of words that you're using? Are you talking over their heads in the concepts that you're bringing forward? Are you speaking some form of lingo or anagram, dialogue that is undecipherable by the average person? I mean, if you're an engineer and you're talking about engineering stuff, great. Everybody gets that. If you're talking about science to scientists, then farms to farmers and mechanics to mechanics, great. But if you're trying to explain to your wife while she's making dinner what happens when the O-rings in your engine go bad and now you have smoke coming out of the tailpipe, probably maybe 1 in a million wives could care. Oh, really what she wants to know is how much is it going to cost, how long is it going to take, and how much of a mess are you going to make in my garage fixing that problem? Or can you even fix it? Or are you going to have to pay a specialist to do it? That's what she's thinking. She's not concerned about the compression ratio. She's not concerned about the size of the rings and what it'll mean to bore out the piston cylinders and put bigger rings in it. She doesn't care about any of that kind of stuff. In fact, there are probably some people listening to this podcast right now who just got a little lost because I got too deep in the weeds and I didn't get anywhere near the weeds. I mean, we're still on the beach looking at the sand, and there's just a couple of little cattails waving in the wind between us. We're nowhere near the weeds of what it takes to replace the rings in an engine. But your interest is already waning. See, when I talk about communicators, and I've been guilty of this. I was guilty of this for a long time. I probably still am. And I have some friends and some clients where the conversation has the invitation to literally just brain dump. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, whatever's on your mind, whatever my question, my thought, my answer invokes in you, bring it. We'll talk about it. We'll dive into it. We'll go a little further on that conversation. We'll ask the tough questions about that tough question. We might even dissect the reason that you asked that question. And those conversations can be 2 and 3 hours long. And most of those conversations I have with my coaching clients because they tend to speak in their language about their industry, about their topic to great detail. Good. You should know your topic. You should know it very, very well so that when you're having that conversation with a peer, you know how to go deep. And you should do the hard work of going deep. That's really probably the most valuable thing that I offer to clients. I'm a pretty well-read person. I read a lot of things on a lot of different topics, and it's because I have clients in all kinds of fields. I have clients with backgrounds, former military, physicians, neuroplasticity. I have a client who is a master NLP instructor, a client who is a 20-year veteran therapist, pastors, preachers, politicians, logistics, you name it. And I want to know enough about their life, their conversation, their priorities that I can speak intelligently with them about that. But see, the key priority when we're done with that hard work of digging deep to make sure that we've got a great grasp on those concepts is to then be able to extract those great deep concepts and find the most simplified way to articulate those ideas. That's the challenge that people have when they speak off the cuff. People who are willing to have that conversation and just kind of speak whatever comes to their mind. Those wild Mustangs running through the pastures and the mountains. A fleeting thought comes galloping in and all of a sudden what you were talking about is gone. And those people who are just hanging on by a limb to get relating to them, they're lost in the chaos of this new thought. I'm hoping you're following these metaphors and word pictures because if you can grasp for a moment what handing someone a flower while standing on the beach might be like when suddenly a dozen galloping Mustangs run between the two of you, trampling the flower, trampling your guest, causing disarray and flying dust and sand and noise. And that's what it's like when you're communicating to someone and you're unable to detect what was really important in that relay of information. And just a new thought that came along as you were having a conversation. Now, if you've ever been on either side of that conversation. And you find yourself listening to someone else and you're thinking, wow, that's a great idea. And you're kind of leaned in and you're waiting for the punchline, and then whoo, here goes the horses. And you're like, whoa, where did those come from? Can we get back to the original point? Chances are, no. And the reason that as the receiver, you're kind of stuck in limbo is because the person who has allowed those stampeding Mustangs to charge into their train of thought, into their conversation, into the idea that they're trying to articulate with you, honestly, it's because they didn't do their homework before they got to this point. They're in thinking out loud mode. I know, guilty for a long time. Still probably happens. My wife's probably the greatest victim of that because I think aloud a lot in the car. And I know when she stopped listening because she'll look out the window, change the temperature on the AC, look at me like, I'm sorry, did you say something? After I've been talking for 10 minutes. Sometimes I'm totally okay with that. She's probably the greatest listener of anybody I've ever met. Sometimes she listens and she's actually paying attention. And sometimes she just nods and smiles and keeps listening. And I have no idea what's going on in that pretty little. But when I'm having a conversation with someone, not my wife, and I begin to see that checking of the phone, that shoulder, that glance away, I realize I've lost him. And the sooner you recognize that, the better. Now the question is there something important enough in the relationship or the conversation that you're having that it needs rescued? Or is it time to say, hey, I recognize I've kind of taken up too much of your time. Thanks for chatting with me. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. And mosey on. You got to be willing to make that decision. But before you find yourself in that moment, let me encourage you, it would be so much more beneficial for you as a communicator and for who finds themselves on the listening end of your communication. If you would take the time to think through that galloping herd of Mustangs, that stampede of thoughts, let them run wild while you're alone. Take some notes. Think through these things. Come back to the place where you can articulate everything that you discovered in your deep thinking in a concise, clear, brief, profound, so that when you say short sentences, they drip with knowledge and wisdom. When you come to a conclusion, an idea that you've pounded on it until there's nothing left there. There's still plenty of meat on the bone. There's still plenty to chew on in a single phrase, a turn of phrase, a few words strung together that people can look at and go, wow, that's good. If you listen to some of the greatest motivational speakers, you'll hear some of those little phrases. Some of those are coined phrases that they repeat of each other. And some of those are nuanced phrases from their own life experiences, and the ones that they say, this is not just my experience, this is a common experience. Every human has been here at some point. There are many different turns of the phrase of, the richest place in the world is the graveyard, because a lot of people have used that sentiment, that notion, that idea in a lot of different ways. That's fine. I recently used one. I heard it many years ago. I believe it was Leota Henson who told me this phrase the first time. I was in my mid-20s. Had been doing some evangelism in various places, and it was before I went to England to do street evangelism. Actually, I didn't go there for that reason, but that's what I was doing while I was there when I was off duty as a firefighter. But when I met Leota, I was still very dogmatic, very hard-headed, early 20s, very determined about what I believed. And I remember having a conversation with her one day, and it was obvious that even on the subject, she was much more well-informed than I was. I was in my 20s. Leota was in her 70s. I was a young airman in the Air Force, and she was a multimillionaire who owned several companies and properties. And I made a statement. She looked at me with this wry face, and she said, "Do you know what I mean if I say, never argue with the pig? All it does is frustrate you and annoy the pig." And I thought, that's a brilliant phrase. I've never forgotten that. She was also the one who told me Teddy Roosevelt's phrase, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Whether you believe in yourself or you don't believe in yourself, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. See, those are... turned itself off. That doesn't... I have to finish. Camera's connected. Let's wrap this up and we'll have to call it a day.
Is a master teacher on storytelling, and I learned so much. I'm really going to have to sit down and go back through everything, and I think I might have to have some more coffees with Lauren, but it was totally worth my time, and I really highly recommend it if you're